Today on the Eye of Power podcast, it's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Philip Mann to the show. We met as co-panelists at a group function at Harrisburg University. Dr. Mann is an expert contributor to Snorkel AI. He is the director of the Center of Project Management and Innovation, and he's assistant professor of organization and management at Harrisburg University. And you'll learn that Dr. Mann, Philip, has a wide range of previous experience. He comes on podcasts all the time as an expert in the field of aviation safety and planning, which is a hot topic these days. As we're talking earlier this year, there were a few high-profile mishaps, and so that's put this type of expertise in the spotlight. I thought we'd get into that. We actually don't. We got more into the other aspects of what Philip is a expert in, which is leadership and management philosophies. So we'll get into that, and he's got great takes, born of lots of experience. So without further ado, help me welcome Dr. Philip Mann to the show. Welcome to the Eye of Power podcast. I'm your host, Tom Dardick. But this podcast is not about me. It's about you and your power. It's time to claim yours. So welcome, Philip, to the show today. Appreciate you joining me.
Pleasure.
You're usually on broadcasts for your expertise in air safety and matters of those sort of technical things. You and I met on a panel more around the issues involving leadership and people strategy and things of that nature. So what I'd like to do today is talk about maybe both of those things, if that's good with you.
Yeah, that'll work.
Awesome. Well, what I'm thinking is maybe we start with a little bit of background, just a quick story of how you got to where you are and why you have a take that interests me and hopefully the people that are listening to us.
Sure.
So you're a professor, you're an expert in air traffic safety, all kinds of matters there. Talk a little bit about your path, Philip.
Yeah, I've had kind of a colorful life. That's what I usually tell people. It's been colorful because there's things that disconnect people as I go through the story. Because just kind of early on, I grew up in a little tiny town in southwestern Colorado nobody's ever heard of, but they drive through if they're going to the Grand Canyon. And but from there I went into the Navy, then I went to the Army, then I got out and was in the Guard. So I've been in the Navy, Army, and the Guard, and that's kind of it kind of shows my path is kind of broad and scattered, but it's generally always been around kind of one of two things. It's been more or less around aviation aerospace or around project management leadership type stuff and where all those kind of things come together. After I got out of service, I went to work for the Federal Aviation Administration. I was a field technician at Denver for a while. Then I went down to Texas and was one of their business analysts. Did a lot of jobs, but business analyst kind of captures most of it. And then I went to their academy. I was an instructor trainer, program manager there for a while. And then I picked up in 2000, like 5 weeks before the COVID shutdowns. I moved from Oklahoma all the way to Pennsylvania to pick up an academic appointment. 5 weeks later, the whole world turns upside down, and I went from being on campus all the time, around my colleagues and that, to being 100% telework. And I'm back on campus now, but most everybody else is still basically 100% telework. And but along that whole way, I've kind of had these ongoing conversations about where things like workforce culture and employee engagement and these leadership sort of outcomes, where those relate to the practical on the ground things like safety and efficiency and even just the effectiveness of how we spend our stakeholders and taxpayer dollars and stuff like that, and where does all that come together?
Best practices, but also efficiencies and how what I'm taking from that, Philip, is I'm thinking like our paradigms as leaders have ripple effects in terms of the behaviors and patterns that are reinforced for both good and ill. Did I catch that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's and I've learned kind of how we as leaders need to be. I'm kind of, coming from aerospace. I'm kind of focused on risk quite often, right? Because aerospace, you don't get second chances in
Right.
aerospace. Was that Freeman Dyson said that aeronautical engineering is the least forgiving form of engineering, something like that. Forget what the actual quote is, but you get the idea.
Yeah, of
And it's
course.
like, you don't get to make mistakes. And I've learned over the years, and this has been especially as in the last, say, 20, 25 years, when things like agile project management and things like this, we've got to pivot and adapt and change, and all that thrashings kind of happen in leadership. I've tried to kind of refocus on, okay, well, what are the consequences of that? Because
Mm,
we think about things, we think about things, how we lead organizations and how we gain efficiency and stuff, but and a lot of those things are not what happens in the next quarter. They're the things that we hope to induce that are going to be lasting in the 5 and 10 and 20 year time frames. And we're starting, we see big problems with that with folks who, and I see a lot, I talk about folks a lot, with between like the pure software people in like the project space, the decision space, versus like one of my old jobs where I used to build airports. And there's a huge difference in. I think a lot of folks that have gone down these software paradigms because of the Silicon Valley stuff, and it's the idea these tech leaders are the great wizards of everything. But
yeah.
the thing is in the software world, and this is something where leaders I think need to realize that in the software world there are no consequences. You can mess something up, and all you have to do is restore a backup or hit undo or Control Z or Command Z or whatever it is, and you've just put the world back the way it was. But if you're building an airport and you put 100 million tons of concrete in the wrong spot, if that costs you, so we'll say it's $100 million project to do that, it might be a $200 million project just to tear it back out and fix it, and then you have to spend the 100 million again and take the 10 years or 20 years again, and on top of all the political capital, all the goodwill, all the trust, and everything you lost along the way because the mistake lands out there. And I think folks have kind of they've kind of lost in the middle there. That even in your pure software environment, so people are always thinking about the products or services or whatever, but they forget about what happens to the people in between.
Right.
They forget what happens with our teams when we're asking them to turn left, turn right, turn left, turn right, duck, jump, duck, jump. Yeah, and every single thing is, we're gonna every single thing is a complete new change, and it doesn't have a like longer term, in that 5, 10, 20 year time frame kind of in mind, where people are being asked to essentially change their entire in a lot of organizations, their entire sense of self. Because if you think like a startup environment, a small environment, so much identity is based in the products of people, personal identity, and that's what gets people bought into startup culture. Is they're making a part of themselves out there. But if that culture extends into an operating environment where companies, call air quote stable, so it's past its initial 3 to 5 years, it's got a product that's reliable, but if the people who work there are essentially being asked to compromise or change their identity every quarter because that's what the new great shiny is. And even if it is in a software environment where there aren't any physical real world consequences, there are consequences in the workforce. Um,
Right, right. Absolutely. Okay, so you just put a ton of clay on the
yeah.
table there. So and clarified a bunch of
Yeah.
things there. So I just want to kind of parse it through and tie some of these things
Yeah.
up. What I hear you saying there, Philip, is um, leaders perhaps routinely, in the pursuit of excellence and improvement, underestimate the costs and true deep costs, not just the physical cost and the cost of mistakes, which can double or triple our initial estimates, but also the psychic cost to the people and the teams. We routinely miss the totality when we're making the decision to this. You call it a shiny new
Yeah.
object. Obviously, we all are invested in that, right? Oh, cool! This is new, improved, better. We want to get better. But if we do so without remembering or thinking about all of the tendrils of the effects, both first level, second level, third level, we can get ourselves into trouble. Did I get you right there?
Yeah. 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 And I think that's, I think it's probably reasonable, and check me if I'm off on this, but I think it's reasonable to think that a lot of leaders are too narrowly focused on what they determine to be success. Because they think about the success of a product or the success of an initiative, but they don't think about enduring success of the team. And this kind of goes
Yeah,
there, there's a
yeah, yes, yes.
you know, there,
You mentioned short term versus
yeah,
long term. That's one
yeah.
lens. The other lenses, though, are what you just pointed to there, where what's winning look like?
Yeah, what does winning and what does winning look like? And this kind of there's a related point that I do a lot of my classes, and this is true for whether I'm teaching professionals or whether I'm teaching college students or whatever. I always have this question I ask students, and I've asked this for leaders. I've asked this from people at the Wharton School. I've asked this for people in high flying healthcare fields. And in all the years I've been doing this, it's probably been about 15 years I've been asking this question. I've had one person come up with the answer unprompted, other than just asking a question, it came up with it, and you'll understand why. It was because of a unique circumstance in her life at that time. But I always ask leaders, these people I'm training or teaching or whatever, I ask them, okay, well, what's the one stakeholder group that exists in every single project, every project, not every project in a certain industry, not every project in a certain context. Ask them which is the stakeholder group that exists in every project that everybody forgets about. And and you'll get all the stuff, like you'll get all the buzzwords coming out. You'll say, oh, shareholders, oh, customers, oh, users. Every once in a while, somebody will actually acknowledge that the project team, the implementers
Team.
themselves, are a stakeholder. But that's not it. It's the families and relationships of the immediate connections of the stakeholder of the project team outside of the project. Because every project is a
Ah,
project team. And I usually label this as a family, but it's whatever you think family means. Like my best friend is my family. And the thing is people forget about this, but they forget about that family member who supports that project engineer is a key stakeholder for that project. Because think about how many leaders, like they get behind schedule and they're just willy-nilly, oh, we're going to work mandatory overtime, we're going to work 6 7 day weeks, all this kind of stuff. I've been in a project where the lead engineer went up to the contracting officer. It's a government thing, so the contracting officer was kind of the main project manager. Went to the contracting officer and said, all right, well, I can't work any more overtime or any more weekends because I've been given conditional divorce papers because I've worked like 18 20 weekends in a row. I'm working 12 15-hour days, and like, yeah, they get comp time and overtime and stuff, but it says that doesn't replace picking the kids up and taking them to their baseball game or just being home. And in this particular case, the dude's wife just had enough, and she said, you know what?
so
She said it's either you fix this job situation, or which could mean quit. Because and actually, I talked to him at some other sometime a few weeks later, and she actually just told him you need to quit the job.
yeah.
Instead of quitting a job, he went and talked to the contracting officer, and then but the contracting officer didn't even realize they were affecting these families. And it happens. I mean, like our health suffers, all this kind of stuff suffers, but
Sure.
we forget about that. The success of our project team is not, it's beyond just their launch of a product or something. It also is their sustainability of their ability to sustain a certain lifestyle, to sustain a certain habit of relationships and a certain pace of self growth and all that kind of stuff. But we keep forgetting about that people have a life, and this isn't like a work. This is a whole person thing. This isn't
Exactly.
it's partially under that umbrella of work life balance, but this is really just considering that Phil looking at Tom here, where I'm like trying to get a handle on a whole this whole person, this Tom, including Tom the individual, Tom the set of skills, Tom the representative of a business, Tom the friend and colleague and the partner and all this kind of stuff, and realizing that we all have these things,
Yeah.
but we leaders quite often, because they're so narrowly focused on the business initiative, the discrete business initiative or something, that they disconnect the supporting functions. That's one of the reasons why Silicon Valley. I wrote a thing for LinkedIn recently where they're talking about. It actually asked me their editors asked me to comment on one of their news things, and they said, it's this whole thing about these top tech jobs, and the places like Meta and Alphabet and Google, those. And thing is those are not great places to work.
Right.
They're great
Right.
places to add to your resume so you can then do something else. But everybody who goes into those, it's like going into those white shoe law firms in Manhattan. You know for a fact that for the next 2 to 5 years, you're going to be working 80, 100-hour weeks. You're going to be sleeping under your desk. You're going to be absolutely fried, but you're going to make good money. you're going to make good connections, and you're going to build a good off ramp for other options. But that's not the place you're going to end.
Right,
You
right,
know,
right.
and I think we need to get back to that thing where we think about our, or at least make the deliberate choice. That's it, make the deliberate, because for some companies, it is the right choice to light their people on fire and burn them out and get it, squeeze everything they can to get out of them. Give them that boost that only having a work history with somebody like Google is ever going to do for you. That's the trade-off we do, but we're doing it deliberately. We're not saying that we're focused on the whole person, that we're this great place to live and this great place to work and all that. But how the rubber meets the road, and how we actually implement it, is we focus so narrowly on deliverables and so narrowly on the strict quarter to quarter business criteria we're trying to
Right.
satisfy, that we just absolutely fry that one resource we have, that if we choose to, if it's important to us, if we give them a place where they can flourish, where they can grow, where they can they can build an identity there, then they become part of, they're part of the service we deliver. They're part of the culture. But those, I think those just need to be deliberate choices. Whereas a lot of leaders
Makes
now, they
sense.
don't make the deliberate choice. They pay lip service to the whole person, and that's where you get the coffee maker, and you get the gourmet coffee maker and the kiddie pool and whatever, because they're whatever ping pong tables. But where they command the effort is in this burnout culture. And the thing is there's a whole span of stuff in there that it deep down gets to a thing I kind of the thing I like to pivot on every once in a while. It's this knowing where your ands and ors are.
Okay,
You
before
know,
you go into
yeah,
that, let me just wrap up because again,
yeah,
you threw a whole bunch on the table there. Get these massive data
yeah,
dumps. I love it. It's fantastic, but I just want to make sure everyone can track with us.
yeah, yeah,
So what I heard through that, and I love the concept that you're laying out there, Philip, because I see it as very much in harmony and alignment and a driving force, and hopefully what is a trend going from the 20th century to the 21st century in terms of what does it mean to be in the workplace? What is it?
yeah,
And this used to be very much strictly transactional. I have these skills. It's worth this much money. You give me the money for that. I give you the skills. We call it even, and that's the beginning, middle, and end of our
yeah,
relationship. You're pointing to a much fuller and more real dimensionality where you're recognizing that people have an identity, that
yeah,
that we all are functions of the stories we tell about ourselves, and if we go against those things, or if we diminish those things, or if we ask somebody to change those things, these are big asks. These are very, very deep and strong forces, and if we set our organizations up with deaf ears to those forces, we're disadvantaged. And
yeah,
if we're a leader that listens and works in harmony with those forces, we're also advantaged.
yeah.
So, did I get that right? Did I?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that probably the only thing I would add to that is is that either thing can be a successful path for an organization. You can either focus on, say, the product deliverable and you'll burn your people out, or you can focus on the whole person. And but the thing is I encourage people to do that deliberately. Make the choice deliberately. Don't,
Yeah.
because you're going to be able to do one or the other, but you're not going to be able to focus 100% on both of those. You can do
So
70% on one, 30% on another, but you can't equally well focus on quarter to quarter performance. Like a publicly traded company where you're constantly focusing on stock metrics and stuff. You can't focus on quarter to quarter performance for your company, and this gets that and or conversation, but you
okay,
can't do
go
that.
go ahead.
And yeah, you can't do that while simultaneously making the calls and spending the resources and doing all that kind of stuff to project that 5 to 20 year lifespan of somebody you want to identify and be wholly engaged in the company, have that discretionary identity packed into the company. Because if you're focused on the business, if you're focused purely on the metrics, especially the stock metrics, I have a personal bugbear against that. But if you're focused specifically on what is going to get you a higher stock value versus what's going to get you an enduring culture, just deliberately pick one. Don't pick one and then say you're doing both. pick one and do
Yeah.
one well. Because those might be, there's lots of carry on decisions that go from that, and that kind of gets into the next sort of thing. But just be deliberate about which path you take as a leader.
When you say either or could be successful, like it's common, right, where people are willing to sacrifice all and put themselves into whatever the mission, shared mission might be, um, it, whether it be a 2 year, 5 year project, or perhaps they're the kind of person that just wants to live their life that way.
Yeah,
So in that sense, environments that offer that or demand that are legitimate if it's something that is understood, agreed to, and uh, really genuinely serves what the person actually wants,
yeah,
rather than I didn't know what I was getting into and I'm a bad person if I don't do this and I'm sort of guilted in. And now I have me tension around
yeah,
my chosen path.
yeah.
Uh, is that what you're kind of pointing to there?
That's the more the people side of it. But yeah, that's very much it. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of that Tim Ferriss pointed this out kind of indirectly in one of his books. If I'm familiar with him, he wrote the 4 Hour Work Week and
Yeah,
does
of course.
some stuff. But he pointed out a thing in there, and what it kind of gets down to for the person is when they consider their interaction, they consider that trade they're making with an organization, is to ask them, is to figure out which question fits them better. Is this what I am, or is this who I am?
Yeah.
Because the old coffee table thing, and we're of that age where the first question people ask you is basically, what do you do? What's your
Yeah.
job title? As if that job title says anything about your history.
Sure.
Um, and that kind of stuff, and we're seeing a big trend with people getting away from that, especially the newer generations of people, because they're so they're on 24/7. They're they've got a blended identity with everything. So there's not a discrete handoff, and we can discuss whether or not that's a good thing. But they don't have a discrete separation between like who they are at home versus who they are at work. They're very much the who am I. Whereas some of the older generations, if you were a power plant engineer, that started and ended when you got in the car to go to work, and then when you got home, and then found a sofa or went to the bowling league or whatever.
Exactly. Then you put on your home persona. Yeah.
Yeah,
So and it's funny because we can perhaps say, these are different, not necessarily better or worse. I'm thinking about like Ray Dalio's book, on principles, and I'm thinking, from his perspective, it's like, no, it's better to be the whole person and do the identity. I lean in that direction myself because I think it's better to not feel like I'm putting anything on hold. I have to press the hold button when I care about so I can go do the thing I have to do. I think that's worse than just being present all the time, no matter what's in front of your face. I think that continual presence and engagement, no matter what the situation is, whether it's professional, personal, or something we can't even tell the difference between, I think that's superior. So what do you think about that, Philip?
yeah. I think from an engagement perspective, and now there are differences because there are people just like there are the introvert versus extrovert and that kind of stuff. There are people who to themselves, they need to have a clean break between what they do at home versus what they do at
Okay.
work. But
Well,
it's
but they would, I would say that for them, they also need alone time, even if they
yeah,
weren't working and they were in a social
yeah,
situation.
yeah, and they may need to just they may need to just they're like some of the people I knew when I was in school. They always wanted to take like they had 2 classes per semester in grad school. They had to take 2 classes that were very different from each other.
Okay.
They couldn't because it was just too much blending of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like
That's
that person who they might have a hobby as a writer. Maybe they've got a few novels or something. They're a writer, but that's not what they want to do professionally. That's just what they want to dabble with because they need that clean break. But from an
Well, that's an
engagement,
interesting case there because you need something to fuel your to write about, right?
yeah,
You're just writing all day. What are you writing about, right?
yeah,
That
yeah,
dynamic
yeah,
too.
and some of it can be even a thing where they're and again, this is all kind of depending on what makes the whole person.
Sure.
But like that person who's a writer, just to kind of dig that a little deeper, is
Yeah.
like they may have the skills and be very good at something like being a technical writer, writing manuals or writing, legal briefs or something like that, but they don't like it. And
Right.
they've got all the skills, all the abilities. And I saw this myself when I realized, and I think we talked about this when we met, a couple weeks ago, that there was a point in time in my life where I realized I had a second job that was almost identical on paper to a job I'd had before when I was in the military. And I hate, I did hate's a strong word, but I did not have a lot of attachment identity in the second job,
Mm.
compared to the first. And like I said, same skills, same type of people, same type of equipment, same aviation type environment. But there was a very small difference in the jobs. And in the first one I had that I loved, it was troubleshooting and repairing. So it was essentially solving puzzles. Every day I solved puzzles for a living. It's what I did. But the other one was preventive maintenance, like oil changes, turning stuff off to turn it back on, not fixing anything, just going down checklist after checklist after checklist. And I despise that kind of work. It just mentally was exhausting, because there just wasn't enough there to think about.
Right,
Um,
right.
and I didn't feel like I had any sense of progress. It was basically continuously monitoring to make sure the status quo hadn't been violated. Versus
Yeah.
the other one was bringing things back into operation and bringing things back into capability. But it was that, those two differences, like I said, on paper, almost identical jobs. And the same sort of thing could be true with that writer who enjoys, say, writing fiction or writing narratives or maybe even writing about sports stories or something. But
Yeah.
they have, it's all the same skills that get them to like legal writing and research and stuff like that. But for whatever reason, there's a characteristic of the two. They just like the first one and don't like the second one. And I think we're, as a whole person, we're kind of, we need to kind of figure out what are those little things we like, and those small characteristics, and try to start steering us towards more of that and towards less of the things that we don't like. But that takes in an organizational context, that takes a lot of space for self-discovery. It takes a lot of space for flexibility. It takes a lot of space for trying things out. But then it also requires good feedback, because there can be a big difference between things we like and things we're actually good at. And
Or
by
what's
yeah,
yeah, or what's serving the shared
yeah,
mission as well.
yeah, what's
Um,
actually making progress.
Yeah, and just to underscore that, and I'm smiling because what you're talking about, we talk about in where I'm pointing here in the quadrant behind me, the purpose quadrant. That's the process of identifying those things that basket of goodies that is sort of the unique blend of
Yeah,
us, which you were sort of giving great examples of, figuring those out, developing them, putting them to the highest and best use in service to others is the formula for feeling more and more purpose, more and more fulfillment, right? So I think you're speaking our language there,
yeah,
Philip. So
yeah.
yeah. One thing I want to go to, you started going there. I want to make sure we keep going in this direction. So you've got a great sort of overall kind of vision of what can go right and what can go wrong. What's some of the counsel or some of the guidelines or points that you would give leaders or somebody listening to us as a result of all of what you've laid out here? What are some takeaways that somebody might actually apply and think about if they're, let's say they are managing a team or they have an organization that they're responsible for? What are some of the things as a consequence of the points that you've been making would you want people to remember?
I just express it like this. It's just finish the equation.
Finish the equation.
Finish the equation. If this is true, what else must be true? If
Mm,
we must work overtime, what else do we have to be willing to do, or what else has to be true? If we believe we have to force people to work overtime, then that means we are okay with forcing them to not do whatever else they would be doing in that space.
well, this
And
reminds me of critical thinking in a
yeah,
way.
oh
To
yeah,
more,
yeah, yeah. It's a lot of that's kind of rooted in this idea, like in a workforce sort of context or in a people sort of context. It's really making sure people internalize that idea that we all have a 24-hour day, no more, no
mm,
less. You cannot create time. You cannot destroy time. You spend it. Like right now, we are spending every second that we're here, we're spending that second, and hopefully we're spending it on the best thing we can do with that second. It's something in that, in that purpose alignment that we have and that identity alignment we have, and we're engaged with it. But that same thing can kind of, we every time we do things like as a leader, we say force overtime, or and I've got a few other examples. Like we tell the single person to work all the holidays, that
mm,
kind of stuff. There's just like we think about, okay, well, what are we? kind of two things. What are we causing potentially? And as well as if we don't know, we need to
We're,
go find
we're
out.
causing everybody to get married or at least say they're married.
Well, yeah, well, and I mean, it was a thing for me when part of my time was in service. I was quite often that single guy who was a high enough rank to do these duty watches, and I got assigned sometimes 11 months ahead of time to work a holiday, and it never occurred to anybody that I might have a friend of mine that I knew from a prior duty station that invited me to travel a couple hours to their house for Thanksgiving.
Right,
It
right.
never occurred to anybody that I might have friends or I might have a girlfriend or something like that. It never occurred to anybody that I might have a priority that to me is equivalent to somebody else's family. Priority is a big part. That may be a whole separate conversation before
Sure.
we get there.
I
But
know
yeah,
life is inconveniently complicated, right? So
yeah. Well,
yeah,
and
but
and but yeah, get people to finish the equation because if we're asking people to work overtime, okay, that means we're asking them to trade that time to us for money. But what are we asking them to trade away? Now, it could be that they're totally good with it and it fits their identity, all that kind of stuff, but we don't know that unless we have that conversation with them. And and anything beyond a limited acute need, we need to understand what those implications are. Yeah, every once in a while something actually happens. Once in a while, I mean like every few months or something like that, not every third or fourth day. I mean every you know we're talking strategic timelines. Every once in a while, we may have some legitimate acute need that we just don't have time to sort through the stacks of stuff that's going on and figure out what the real impacts are. But that's that happens one time, and by the time it happens a second time, we ought to kind of have an idea of that because we're gonna ask people like how did this affect you. But we need to finish that equation because we need to think about what are we asking people to do. We also need to think about why is this need there. Is it that we're asking people to work overtime because we're not so great at planning, or is the job structured? It could totally be a legitimate thing. We could have a job structured that just requires periodic overtime, and that's the nature of the job. But we need to inform people about that ahead of time. I work for a retail furniture place for a period of time. I was a temp, so I was not an employee of them. But all the employees, like they went in the door knowing that they were going to get 10 hours overtime every week. They knew that. They had 50 to 60-hour weeks right from day one because that's just the nature of the work. And they all knew that. I wasn't, I was a temp. I worked flat 40. But that was a difference. Like I would have been very, very surprised had they started requiring me to work 10 extra hours overtime because I had my work schedule figured out, and then I had other stuff I was doing after that. And I'm one of those people. I live on my calendar and sometimes schedule stuff 6, 8, 9, 10 months ahead of time, buy tickets and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think we need to just perpetually finish that equation. When we want to push on something, find out what we're pushing on the other side of it. When we want to pull something, let's see how much rope we have to pull. Let's not just blindly yank on it and find out, oh yeah, we had this much room to give before something broke.
Philip, let me ask you this: what prevents leaders from finishing the equation in your view?
I think a lot of it is honestly just a lack of prioritization.
Yeah.
I think about some consultants I know who talk about they do C-level consulting quite often. Have been doing it for 20 something years, and they constantly have this conversation with C-level people and the CIOs, CEOs, all that kind of stuff. They always ask them like there's kind of a process they go through, but they always basically start out with this thing of asking them, okay, what are your priorities? And it's all the CIO stuff, CEO stuff, whatever. It's strategic this, capital that, long term the other, all these big, big, big things that you hire a C person for. And
Sure.
then they say, all right, now show me your calendar for last year. And they show their calendar, and it's basically stupid meeting, stupid meeting, stupid meeting, stupid meeting, stupid meeting. In other words, all the things they say are a priority are not reflected in how they use that limited 24-hour day. And that's the thing is if we want people to do this stuff, they have to preferentially put those things on the calendar. You can't hope to have space for them. If you and this is true for life as it is for leadership. If you have a legitimate priority that is, say, some kind of strategic plan or strategic development or something, if that's one of your top priorities, there needs to be a repeating box on your calendar somewhere that has that on there. And
Yeah.
it doesn't give for anything that is not a higher priority.
Right. I mean, you gave me example when we talked before, even at the personal level. If you want to be in shape, you
Yeah.
can't skip the gym, right? You can't.
Yeah,
The
you gotta,
workout doesn't do itself.
yeah, and you don't hope to find, because hope is not a strategy. You do not hope to find a spot to go to the gym. You block off time at whatever time you can manage. It's gonna be different for everybody. If you have to go to the gym, you block that on your calendar, and you don't substitute that out for anything that is not a legitimately higher priority than that.
Yeah.
And if it and this is just, kind of back to that whole person thing. Like there are periods I have blocked for the gym. I do not take meetings. Like I don't it could be the president of the university telling me we got to meet during this time, and maybe if he tells me and it's a really acute thing and I determine that
Sure.
it gets higher priority than that, but they got to tell me that ahead of time. It's not just going to be because that person,
Right.
but that's a thing. And I think we so much, both as there's, two sides. As individuals, I think we're too willing to subordinate our whole person for, you know whatever the pressure to be a team player, be perceived as a team player, whatever. But we're also, as leaders, too willing to either consciously or unconsciously take advantage of that.
Hmm.
Like we will schedule somebody for, they may have time blocked off on their calendar. This happened at one point in time when I was in the government. I blocked off. I had these certifications. I had a ridiculous amount of PDUs I had to do every year for it, and I blocked off basically my afternoons on Friday just to do training. And I had a supervisor at the time who kept trying to was trying to schedule a meeting with me, and realized that I had every Friday afternoon blocked for the next 9 months. And he's like, "Well, what are you doing this Friday?" I said, "Well, all these certifications that I have that nobody else has, that's maintaining these." He's
Yeah.
like, "Oh, yeah, because if I don't have this certification, we can't do this work."
Right.
You know, we had a conversation, and it because he was just used to being able to send so, because I would decline him.
Hmm.
I would decline him, like, no, schedule. It's already scheduled, and it's because I am willing to stare somebody in the face and say no. But we're a lot of people as individuals, as contributors, and even people who are in leadership positions. You can get somebody who's a senior director. If somebody's one step above them in the chain of command, you'll think you got a general talking to a private. What is your legitimate real priority? That needs to be the first thing you put on your calendar. And that includes things like lunch. For me, having that little half hour, depending on the day, where I am just unconnected. I go out to a break area at the university if I'm on campus or whatever, or I go out to the living room if I'm working from home, and I am not at my computer. I am not thinking about work. I might be listening to an audiobook. I might be watching some TV. I might be watching my cats do crazy things, whatever. But I'm mentally not, I'm putting a mental break in between the cognitively challenging things I was doing in the morning to the cognitively challenging things I was doing in the evening. And for me, that's a priority. That's a mental health priority. And that's
Yeah.
so that time gets blocked. And I don't, every once in a while, there'll be a high priority meeting or something I'll take over lunch, or there might be something quasi work adjacent. Like just the other day, there was a fireside chat with the chair of the NTSB. So I was listening to that while I was at lunch, but that was, that's one of those blended personal identity things. That wasn't
Right.
that wasn't
Right.
grading papers.
Yeah,
But
exactly. If it's
um,
interesting to you, then
yeah,
it still
yeah, it's
hits
personal.
you sort of, you experience it as sort of a downtime, or
Yeah,
a recharge, or something that's getting you out of the,
yeah.
so you can come back fresh.
And that is one of those places, and this is, kind of gets to a little bit of what you're talking about earlier about the identity function, is that, that's one of those, that particular thing is one of those instances where my personal and professional identities blend together. You
Right.
know,
Right.
you know, me as a faculty member is a different person than me as a aviation consultant. But me as a educator, as a risk specialist, specialized in aviation, with a personal interest in aviation and airspace policy, those kind of things mesh together at that particular kind of point. As organizations, and this, I think, one of the things we could probably enable with organizations, this is another thing I would encourage leaders to do, is at least consider. I know it'll bend some people the wrong way, but we want to enable our workforce, at least, especially our high performing workforce, but I'd say our workforce generally, to have the capacity to consider everyone just to be a peer. To discard that higher, you have reporting structures and you have hierarchies, and those are necessary for organization and management and flow of responsibility and stuff like that. But if if you can have somebody who's an assistant project analyst and they can have a conversation, polite, respectful, all that kind of stuff, but not over the top. If they are comfortable talking as a professional to another professional with their VP of project management, who's like 6 steps up the hierarchy from them, if they can view them as just being a peer who happens to be on a higher box in the org chart versus being somebody who is a qualitatively better or higher person. And that works both ways too, because I think that VP of project management needs to be able to see that project analyst as a peer person who just happens to be at a lower, less obligated box on the org chart. They are still a person, they're just filling a different role. They're just a different actor on the stage, but they're all
Yeah.
fundamental. Now, my rule is that everybody's a peer unless they vote themselves to be less. There's some people can. I mean, there are people that can get kind of uppity and too big for the britches, as they used to say. Um, and they can vote themselves down. But there's nobody who's superior. There's no inherently superior person.
No.
President of the United States, the Pope, the Dalai Lama, they're all right there with me.
Everybody's a person.
Everybody's a person. Yeah, everybody's a
Everybody's a
person.
person.
Unless
Yep.
they vote themselves to be less of a person. But that's
Yeah, I
an
like that. I
individual
mean,
elective thing.
what I hear you talking about there is it's kind of just respect, right?
Yeah,
Respect for others, respect for yourself. Just it's everybody has value, and you're just recognizing the fact that we have value. So let's just get into that rather than what the circumstantial rankings or responsibilities might be.
yeah,
I mean, they do pertain at times. Somebody's got to
yeah,
make the call, or somebody's got to take the blame, or somebody has more resources, or somebody's looking at a higher scope, or all. We do have these
yeah,
real world differentiators. But when we are working together and we're trying to help each other, rank becomes less of a factor, and what we're actually wanting to contribute becomes more the menu. Is that what I hear you saying?
yeah, yeah. Kind of,
Yeah.
because yeah, the idea I think is it's right aligned with what you're saying, but I view more like the job titles and the positions they're just what line of the script we come in on. They're a shortcut to our role in the situation, but they're not a quality of who we are as a human being.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's the big thing is
Clarification.
separating. That this is one of those places where the whole person is way 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 bigger than that little box that happens to be pinned on their chest for where they are in the org chart.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is using that as just a reference point for the nature of interactions with this person in a professional environment, but that nature of interactions, that just that relative reference, you're a VP of whatever and they're an analyst of whatever. There's a relative reference, just a point of tells you kind of what are the boundaries of the relationships and interactions you're going to have in that professional environment. But when you're talking to or about that person, you're not talking about the box on the org chart. You're talking about and to and with that human being who may be older, maybe younger, maybe different background, gender, whatever, but they're still they cannot separate themselves from that whole person they are. And I would rather that instead of trying to sterilize some of that way through this like obfuscation of the org chart, that we just welcome that and say, hey, we're all people here. You or I may have way more experience. I mean, even just between the two of us here, we're both very experienced professionals, but we have differences in what our experience are. And
Sure.
because we have that, we're probably more inclined in certain situations. I'm going to defer to you because you're the expert. Certain things you're probably going to defer to me because I'm the expert. And the org chart just helps us do that. It helps us understand like where that might go. But we might have a conversation with somebody. This happened. This happened at a few of my different jobs because I've had that colorful career and I've had all these different jobs and experiences. I had when I first got my faculty job, and a lot of people didn't know what my background was. They knew I'd worked in the government, they knew I'd worked in aerospace, but they didn't know that I'd been an academy instructor and that I was, they were having a conversation about like how to deal with students in a classroom. And by comparison, as an academy instructor, I was in a classroom face to face with students 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for like 5 straight years.
Hmm.
And by comparison, the academic, highly experienced people, they spend 2 to 4 hours per week total in a classroom.
Right.
So I spent more time every day in a classroom than they spent on any given week, and in some cases in any given month.
Mm.
So like a week for me, like a 40-hour week in a classroom for me, and just kind of for comparison, a 14-week semester that we have at the university only has 28 contact hours.
Right.
So
Right.
every week where I was spending somewhere between 30 and 40 hours in a classroom, I was spending an entire semester, and I did that week in and week out for like 5 straight years. So I had so much more experience, but they just didn't know because they were seeing me as this brand new assistant professor.
I know it's a little sidebar, but I'm curious. What did you appreciate that because they didn't see that they didn't learn or see or
Yeah,
appreciate?
a piece that I appreciated about the situation, about the commentary, what was going on, is that I had worked in a high immersion environment, and they didn't recognize that they're in a very low immersion environment.
Okay,
And
so
and
they
so
didn't
they
see the full spectrum
yeah,
of experience in this way.
so they were,
Okay.
yeah, and they were trying to treat like this 2 hours a week they spend with students as if this 2 hours is time they're going to get like really deep knowledge and really deep connections, and they're going to have all this time to understand,
Okay.
whereas,
This is a
you
good
know,
example. I like this.
yeah,
Keep going.
yeah, and where they were going to be like get these deep personal connections with these 30 students in their classroom. I got to contrast that because most of my classes as a technical trainer at the academy were between 8 and 12 students. Some of them were bigger, but most of them were like 8 to 12 students. And these are 8 to 12 students in this, and I'm not spending 2 hours a week with them. I'm spending 8 hours a day every day. Sometimes going to lunch, every once in a while you might meet for, you might happen to be in a place and have a beer together or something like that, because they were all colleagues, right? Because I had, when I was working in Denver, I had been a student in those same classes I was teaching.
Okay.
So I'd
So
had
this
like
was
a,
more like coworkers kind of
yeah,
relationship
yeah,
you
and
had.
that was for me, that everybody's a peer thing, that really kind of helped mature that and helped solidify that a lot, because I got to see folks who, when they were the instructor, all of a sudden now they're the they call the sage on the stage, right? They were the person who was like, I have the knowledge and you don't. That's why you're here. I'm like, no, no, no. There's a good chunk of people, like those six, 12 people in the room there. There's a good chance that some of those cats know more about this than I do. They just didn't go to the class, or they went
Right.
to an Air Force class that didn't count for the FAA, or they're really good at one thing and really bad at something else, and I'm trying to level them off so they don't blow themselves up when they try to work in the system. But
Sure.
but the but on top of that, I also got to, also had the time to actually really get to know people and really see what immersion was. Like I said, I mean, I'm spending more time every week in this class with these students, and some of these classes were 6, 8 weeks long. So I might spend the equivalent of like 2 academic years in the same classroom with the same students, who I already had a one-to-one so I knew exactly what their job was in the field. I already had historically a complete 100% overlap with what they were doing in the
Sure.
field and what they did.
Sure.
So I really knew where they were coming from. So in a lot of ways, that was coming from a situation where I was, just like from the very beginning, I had, like, on day one of the class, I had more capacity to empathize with these students than, on day one, just because of the shared backgrounds and all that kind of stuff, than most of these academic faculty had, or, but they had this idea that they were somehow going to achieve that, because I don't think they recognized what the delta was, what the difference was between, their experience going to grad school at whatever University of Pennsylvania 35 years ago was, compared to this. A
Sure.
lot of, compared to this, like a lot of our students are foreign visa students, compared to this kid who's maybe a medical doctor who is trying to who's on a visa going to a project management program in the US that's mostly online, but they have to travel in from Chicago once a month to show up to class on campus, completely not able to recognize that they've got a lot of work to do to get to that level of empathy and understanding and connectedness. And you can't just skip that.
Based on your experience there, when you are in those situations where you don't have the high immersion or the high intersection with people, what do you do to make up for that, Philip?
Personally, I start right back at my rule. I tell everybody here, like, look, I'm a person, you're a person. In my class, I'm like, yeah, I am teaching a class, but you all are working professionals. Just call me Phil, Philip, whatever. Like you can skip the doctor, whatever. Everybody in this building's a doctor. Who cares? You know. But I
Right.
try to get back to
So,
I
so
kind of get back to that basic humanity, that basic we are human adults that all speak English. And let's start with that common point, and the one we know we have, and let's not.
you're eliminating that initial the sage on the stage or
Yeah,
the boss or whatever barrier.
yeah,
You're just trying to demolish that and say, look,
yeah.
let's just talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
my job is to is to help you learn what you have to learn through this. And those are the usual things like what their role is, what my role is, and I mean even that actually goes clear back to an experience, a formative experience I had in the military at one point in time. A little bit of a story, but I got appointed to be a
Okay.
CPR, CPR instructor at one point in time. Anyway, and when I went through all this, I was the only like maintenance person. Everybody else in my class was in the hospital. They were nurses and stuff that worked at the hospital. But I realized at one point in time, and it's skipping a lot of fun detail. We'll share it some other time. But where I realized that when it was my job to deliver curriculum, for the assessment to get certified as an instructor, I was in a different uniform than everybody else because they all worked at the hospital and I worked at a whole different command. I had a aviation background. Everyone else was in healthcare, and sitting right in front of me for a CPR class is the head cardiac surgeon and a head cardiac nurse. But I realized at that instant that I was there to fulfill a role, and they were there to fulfill a role. And as long as I was not there to impress them. I was not there to wow them and convince them with some fact or figure that they'd never heard before. I was there to faithfully and accurately and charismatically deliver this content in a way that would be well received by the people whose role it was to be open to this information.
Right.
And
Right.
and when I made that connection, like that is the moment I lost all my fear of public speaking. Like I have
Mm.
no fear of public speaking because of that. And then they told me later, the surgeon and the head nurse came up and talked to me later. They said they told me, they said, we come and see these because there's so many hospital people there. They say they come and see those every single time they do them, and they do them like twice a year. And they told me, they said that is the far and away the best delivery they have ever seen from any class ever.
Wow.
Because instantly I made the connection with what my part was, and I try to allow my students in the classroom to rediscover that they're there for a role. They're not there to impress me. They're not there to knock my socks off. They have certain things they have to do. I have certain things I have to do. Those things connect in the middle. And, they're just little push and pull. Some people need a little more help. Some people a little less help. Everybody's got a different background, so some things are going to be easy for some people, harder for some people. But we're all there together to run through this play that is a 14-week semester with some air quote scripted interactions. We've got some scheduled interactions we have to make, and there's some certain deliverables we have to work together to make successful. And if all that works out fine, everybody gets to the end of it, and they have that act of the play is over, and they move on to another act. So everybody comes in. I try to just little challenges because a lot of them are Asian, so they've got that really high power differential that they're trying to overcome, that authority.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. There's always going to be cultural issues, but I'm glad you told the story because, and let's talk it through, and because I'm kind of connecting it to where we started as it related to leaders of organizations, because they might have the same dynamic that you're pointing to
Yep.
here, where whether they're not necessarily the sage on the stage, but you do have the ivory tower barrier that sometimes, not sometimes, most times, is something that people assume as a barrier. And so this paradigm that you pointed to that was able to differentiate you from the experiences of others, in a dramatic way. Why? Because they got the material. Right, because you were able to deliver whatever the deliverables were in ways that didn't have the pageantry of what was expected. Well, can't leaders of any organization learn from that same approach?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think there's lots of pieces to it. And a big thing is kind of like what I was talking about earlier, is like those boxes on the org chart they're just your line on the script. They're just the role you're playing. And in a more kind of to carry the theatrical thing, everybody's a supporting actor to somebody else.
Yeah.
But everybody's playing a role. And I think organizations kind
Well,
of
and
more.
everybody's the hero of their own story too.
Yeah,
So,
everybody's there. Everybody's the hero of their story while they're on screen. Everybody's story also is bigger than just what's on that box
of
because if we,
course.
as an individual, right? But I think there's places on there where organizations can do some of that finishing the equation. They can do some reconciliation and think about, okay, based on the way we envision these roles, the cast of characters we have, are the things that we want people to do enabled by the structure, including the physical structures of the building and stuff like that. Because I think a lot about leaders that it was like the common thing. I have an open door policy. Yeah, but your open door is behind 3 separate doors and 2 receptionists on the 14th floor that you need a special card to get to.
Right.
Like, if you really have an open door policy, put your office down off the lobby. Where everybody walks past it every day and anybody can literally duck in.
Or
Um,
get out of your office and go walk around the
yeah,
place and see people.
yeah, and even better, tell people where you're gonna be. Say,
Mm.
hey, I'm gonna go down. Like there's where the university is. There's a Denim Coffee on the corner. It would be awesome if the leadership, if they, they're not gonna be able to talk to all 300 people, but if they just send out an email to the 25 or 30 people that are in the building saying, hey, all y'all are in the building. If you got time, I'm gonna go down and grab a coffee. I'll be down there for like a half hour, 45 minutes. If you want to go talk about something, let's go down there and talk. Or hey, I'm gonna walk over to the new building and would enjoy some company over there for anybody who's got questions about what's going on or something like that. It's kind of a running joke in our university. Like my office is on the 10th floor, and the 10th floor might as well be in the basement
Mm.
because nobody from the 14th floor where leadership is ever makes it down to the 10th floor unless they're looking for something specific.
Right, right.
They'll make it to 13 because 13 for a lot of them, that's the bathroom is actually closer to go down the stairs to 13 than it is to go all the way across 14. So on the 10th floor, the people will actually call me on Teams and stuff, or they'll send me an email when they literally could have just walked down a couple flights of stairs or come down an elevator, and I'm there, 8 hours, 8 hours, 4 days a week. And part of that is like is that just one of those things where there's often this thing of we got an open door policy, we want you to come talk to us, but the executive suite is literally behind a set of locked doors that sometimes even during the day the entire suite is locked off. People that are inside can get out, but they're guarding their thing, right? And
Yeah,
that
it's a physical and psychic barrier.
Yeah, yeah, it is, and honestly, I'm kind of a fan of the way a lot of Asian cultures do it, where your executive suite is on the main floor. Now they do that for practical reasons that the executives could get in and out of their offices faster
Mm.
because the short path is the convenience.
Right, right, right.
And building codes and things being what they are, it's easier to escape. But but I mean that's the thing is leaders need to do that. They need to think about what it is that they want. Is everything set up in a way to facilitate the bigger outcomes that they're looking for? And again, if they're looking for short outcomes, just specify that you're only concerned about quarter to quarter outcomes, and don't complain when the long term stuff goes wrong.
Right, right.
And I think that's the thing is just be honest about what you're looking for, what you want, what defines success as a leader and as an organization, because that might be two separate things. Understand what defines success. If that's reconcilable, like success for the organization is reconcilable with the success as a leader, if those things mesh up, you're fine. Then the rest is just harmonizing the organization. But if those two things are different, if you're really a people person and you really believe in engagement and you really believe in the whole person, all that kind of stuff, but your organization is, drive quarter to quarter revenue, do layoffs this quarter to drop the net expenses so you can increase the stock score so we can maybe hire some people back or contract them next quarter or whatever, that you've done all the games that go on. If that's the kind of organization you're in, it's probably a good bet for that leader, that high engagement, high people person leader. They probably need to find someplace else to be. That's something that also people all the way down, every role on the script needs to be able to do that. Granted that generally speaking, the more deprecated the role is, the farther down it is on the org chart, the less economic mobility somebody has, and probably the less marketability they have to be able to make free choices. Somebody who's a C-level person, unless they're garbage at it, they can pick up the phone and call and get an executive job somewhere else. It shouldn't be that hard, especially if they're willing to relocate. But somebody who's down as a assistant program analyst somewhere probably doesn't have enough money saved up to pay to pay for a move across country, even if they've got a job across country. It's the same discussion, but it's more of in the bigger organization. I think it's more incumbent on those leaders who have the ability to do so, to work with how those structures and artifacts and things are in a company, to try, as long as they can reconcile what the goals are. Your quarter to quarter company, you need to hire quarter to quarter people. But
Yeah.
if you're really interested in engaged workforce, you need to look at how is the organization structured, what are the artifacts and processes, and do those actually facilitate the whole person and the whole person buy into the job and the identity in that, or are we pushing people with short term incentives, with pro forma kind of 360 feedback kind of things, stuff like that, that are maybe they're good tools, but we're just not using them well, or maybe they're not what we really need to do. Maybe the job itself has the capacity to give people immediate feedback on how well they're doing. A lot of jobs could do that.
Right.
If you got
Right.
the
You
math
get,
wrong.
yeah, that's right. There's different reward structures and
Yeah.
experiential sort of feedback loops and so
Yeah.
forth.
And
Yeah.
those all need
So,
to be harmonized towards whatever you're trying to accomplish. All that stuff needs to be harmonized to that purpose, and not trying to pull something off the shelf that's great for profit or revenue if you're really trying to engage long-term workforce and long-term people development engagement. Because sometimes you need to be able to sack some of your immediate efficiency and immediate profit and stuff. Nobody's going to go bankrupt over it, but you need to be able to turn up those expenses and turn down that profit a little bit, because you may need to reskill or partially reskill some people that have potential to be high engagement employees, but that just don't have, however they got onto the org chart, they just don't have exactly what you need to put them in the spot where they're going to be the most productive. You might have to help them get there. And that
yeah.
might mean dealing with a slightly less productive employee for a while, or dealing with somebody who's going to a class every Friday for 6 months or something like that. And yeah, there's a trade-off, but
Well,
if it's
this to me, Philip, this is sort of a special case of the the
yeah,
equation piece, right? Where you're not just looking at this one metric that's right in front of
yeah,
us, but you're looking at the longer term metrics of what, including the full family of who the
yeah,
stakeholders are and everything else. So, yeah, I think
yeah.
that's good. Yeah, awesome. Well, hey, listen, we could keep going on. I
We
I
can.
I mean, I probably there's a dozen questions I thought I might ask me to get to. So, you know,
Oh,
we
we'll
could keep
scale.
going, but we'll do it in bite-sized chunks. Maybe we can have another conversation in the near future and maybe take it down another line here because this is fantastic. Everything you say, it makes sense to me. I think it's very much in harmony with what we talk about with the eye of power. And I love getting your specific story from your perspective, because it's a very unique perspective and a very valuable perspective because of all the wide ranges of experiences you do have. I thought we'd talk about some of the air issues. We never got to that. So maybe we'll save that for next time.
Yeah. Oh,
So,
we could put a few of these on the calendar.
yeah, okay, sounds good.
All right.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Philip. Very much appreciate it. And thanks for dropping, you've dropped a ton of knowledge on us. So thanks so much.
Sure thing. Thanks for having
Yeah.
me.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, Philip, thanks again for joining me today. As always, I very much enjoyed our conversation, and I hope it was everyone listening found it valuable. Just a few things that I want to underscore. You dropped a lot on us, so I want to just kind of clarify. I thought that the idea of the shiny object, one of the things that those who are dedicated to making their teams better are going to be attracted to new and improved ways. And of course, I'm all about that. We've got a new improved way in the mentor machine that we hope people will adopt. But in so doing, I think it does behoove us to pay attention to the full part of the equation. And I think that that includes long term as well as short term thinking, but also the full nature of the energetic investment, whatever a new thing might be. And I think that's important to remember who the stakeholders are, not just the initial people involved, but the ripple effects. And he talked a lot about the whole person, and that I think is a trend. We talk about that a good amount on the Eye of Power. It's a trend in the world where the lines between what is work and what is the regular life, and what we feel we're getting from work It's not necessarily just a paycheck, it's something more. And I think that trend will continue. So that puts pressure on organizations and on leaders to think in these more holistic or more whole person terms. When asked about how they might do that, Philip had some good answers there. Finish the equation was one of the things that I really want to make sure we emphasize. What does that mean? That means if this is true, what else is true? Going through it, being consultative, breaking down whatever barriers might be there because of preconceived notions of authority or positions or those sorts of things. Understand why the needs are there, being collaborative and consultative with our conversations, and as we reach decisions to make sure we are listening and open to more than just the stakeholders that happen to have their assignments because of their title. I think that's an important consequence of this kind of approach. The idea of the peers, of everybody's a peer, I love that. That's something that we really think is in harmony with what we're trying to do with the mentor machine, where people are supporting each other as growth partners, and the authority level is secondary. Other people, can hold us accountable regardless of what their experience or their authority level might be. Not that we ignore the positions or the roles or the org chart, but it's what Philip said on that is that's just where we come in on the script, and I think that's a nice way of leveling the playing field in that sense. So I hope you got as much as I did from that conversation. So thank you so much, Philip. Thank you for listening to us, and we'll see you again on the Eye of Power podcast. This has been the Eye of Power podcast with Tom Dardick. I'd like to thank you for listening. I'd also like to thank my brother, Scott Dardick, for the music and his music production. If you'd like to reach me, simply email Tom at dardickcommunications.com.